The Glens Falls, New York, town hall shimmered with a crisp, restless buzz that frosty October evening in 2025, the air laced with the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke drifting through the cracked windows. Rows of wooden benches creaked under a crowd of upstate locals loggers in faded flannel, their hands rough from sawdust. Retirees clutching thermos mugs, the steam curling faintly. Families juggling scarves and restless kids, the rustle of wool blending with the low hum of space heaters. They'd gathered under the glow of old chandeliers to hear Elise Stefanik, the rising GOP star, whose sleek blazer and polished North Country accent turned the modest hall into a crucible of quiet expectation. The space, usually a stage for craft fairs and school concerts, pulsed with a different tension tonight, as if the stained glass panes braced themselves for a shift. Her voice cut through the murmurs: opportunity, security, American values, her hands gesturing with the precision of a seasoned lawmaker. The crowd clapped unevenly, some nodding with steady approval, others shifting with guarded doubt, the energy more subdued than the fiery cheers of her campaign peaks. Outside, the wind howled through the Adirondacks, a low moan rattling the trees. But inside, in the fifth row, a small figure sat coiled, a spark of defiance glowing beneath a tangle of dark braids, her presence a subtle ripple against the room's steady hum. 9-year-old Lucy sat with her knees tucked under, her braids swaying as she clutched a scuffed purple backpack to her chest, her boots tapping faintly against the bench. Her striped sweater, green and white, a thrift store find, stood out like a flag against the muted sea of earth tones around her. Beside her, her aunt, a wiry woman with a knit cap and a weathered coat, kept her eyes on Stefanik, her calloused hands twisting a flyer into knots, her jaw tight with a mix of hope and fatigue. Inside Lucy's backpack wasn't a toy or a snack, but a crumpled notebook, its pages a patchwork of orange ink questions she'd scrawled under the flicker of a kitchen bulb, born from a dream she couldn't shake. "You don't have to say it, Luce," her aunt had whispered as they'd left their drafty trailer that evening, the door creaking shut, her voice rough with worry. "She's a big shot." But Lucy's brown eyes had flashed, her grip tightening on the straps until her knuckles paled. "I need her to listen," she'd said, and her aunt had seen a fire in her she couldn't quench, a fire stoked by a future she wanted to claim. For months ago, Lucy's world had shifted. Her cousin, Sarah, 22, a college grad with a sharp mind, had come home from a job interview in tears, her suit jacket crumpled, her "they picked the guy," a sob that echoed through their tiny Levying room. Lucy had listened, perched on the stairs, as Sarah told her aunt about the boardroom men in ties laughing off her ideas, dismissing her resume for lacking grit. Lucy had grown up on her aunt's stories, tales of women breaking barriers, of leaders pavying the way, but Sarah's defeat, the way her aunt's shoulders sagged under extra shifts at the mill, didn't match. She'd started writing in that notebook doodles of crowns, stick figure girls, then questions, fierce and clear, until they shaped the one she carried now, a challenge she needed to voice. Stefanik glided through her speech with the polish of a capital veteran: economic growth, border strength, lifting every voice, her smile tight and rehearsed, drawing murmurs of "right on" and scattered applause. She spoke of empowering families, of merit-based success, her voice a steady rhythm of Con-VY tie-in as she painted a future of fairness reborn. Lucy watched, her stillness a sharp contrast to the fidgeting kids nearby, her fingers tracing her backpack's frayed zipper, her eyes tracking Stefanik's every move, the way her hands sliced the air, the way her smile stayed fixed, a wall she couldn't breach. The crowd stirred, some leaning forward with hope, others slumping back with a cynicism honed by mill closures and rising rents. A logger in the back scratched his stubble, grumbling about timber prices. A retiree beside him clutched her thermos, her sigh heavy with years. But Lucy sat like a hawk, her breath shallow, her heart pounding as she waited for her shot. The moderatora, stocky man with a clipboard and a nervous smile, called for questions, and the room came alive. Hans Rosie, a welder asking about jobs, his voice rough with steel, a nurse querying healthcare, her tone clipped. A retiree fussing over pensions, his glasses slipping as he spoke. Stefanik fielded each with a smooth, practiced e-stats about tax cuts, anecdotes from her district, a nod to upstate resilience. The crowd clapped politely, some nodding, others exchanging looks that hinted at doubts unasked, the answers crisp but not stirring, like a breeze that didn't warm. Lucy's aunt glanced at her, worry creasing her brow. "You sure, Luce?" she whispered, her flyer now a shredded pile. But Lucy shook her head, her braids bouncing, and slid off the bench with a soft thud that cut through the hum. She moved forward, her boots scuffing the hardwood, her steps steady as she wove through the maze of knees and coats to the microphone stand. The crowd didn't notice at first, their focus still on Stefanik's latest quip, something about coastal elites, but then heads swiveled, eyes narrowing as this small figure emerged. Whispers buzz, "Who's that kid? What's in that bag?" "She's tiny." Their voices a low rumble that grew as she reached the front. She stood there, dwarfed by the mic, her purple backpack a shield against the swell of stairs. The moderator faltered, his clipboard trembling, his mouth opening to redirect, but Lucy raised a small hand, claiming her turn with a quiet defiance that hushed the room. The chatter faded, a brittle silence settling like frost on the peaks, every creak and sigh swallowed by the stillness. Stefanik paused, her head tilting, her sharp gaze softening with a flicker of curiosity as she rested her hands on the podium. "Well, hi there, sweetie," she said, her tone warm and in VY-ting, a smile tugging at her lips. "What's on your mind?" Lucy unzipped her backpack, pulled out her notebook, flipped to a page marked with a crown, and took a shaky breath. "MS. Stefanik," she began, her voice low but a thunderbolt. "You say you're for fairness, so why'd my cousin Sarah lose her job to a boy who didn't try as hard?" The words struck like a gust through the pines, raw and unyielding, shattering the calm with a truth too plain to dodge. Stefanik's smile vanished, her eyes widening, her hands tightening on the podium as the crowd gasped a sharp, collective inhale that sucked the air dry. Her face, a bastion of poise and control, faltered Chakar VY-ing lines across her brow, unease flickering in her gaze, a vulnerability she couldn't mask in that moment. A 9-year-old had confronted her head-on. The silence stretched, cold and electric, a live wire humming through the Glens Falls Hall as Lucy's question reverberated, its simplicity cutting deeper than any filibuster ever could. It wasn't just a child's wonder, it was a shard of reality piercing the heart of Stefanik's platform, a plea wrapped in ink that demanded more than platitudes. The chandeliers flickered faintly, casting jagged shadows across the benches, as if the light itself trembled under the weight of her words. Stefanik stood rooted, her knuckles whitening against the podium, her polished shell unraveling under a scrutiny she hadn't prepped for in any caucus or campaign stop. Her eyes darted to the crowd searching for refuge, stalling for grace, then locked back on Lucy, who stood unwavering, her notebook clutched like a banner, its orange scrawl a silent testament to a dream tested and found wanting. The room's warmth dissolved, every rustle of a coat, every shift of a boot, every stifled breath swallowed by a hush that pulsed with her challenge. This wasn't a reporter's jab or a rival's taunt, it was a little girl's truth, its purity a mirror held up to a woman who'd built her name on equity, and it reflected something she couldn't ignore. Lucy didn't flinch. Her boots stayed planted, her brown eyes piercing, daring Stefanik to answer not with spin, but with something real. Her aunt sank lower in her bench, her coat slipping as her flyer fell to the floor, her hands trembling as the weight of her niece's boldness pressed down on her fragile frame. Whispers flared, "She's got a point. What's she gonna say?" "That's deep." Their voices a low, urgent buzz that swelled and then hushed as the moderator waved them down, his clipboard shaking like a leaf in a storm. Stefanik cleared her throat, a rough, halting sound that broke the silence, and adjusted her Blazera reflex, a lifeline she grasped as the room waited. "That's a big question, isn't it?" she said finally, her accent quieter now, stripped of its podium polish, the warmth fraying into something fragile. The crowd leaned forward, their bodies a sea of tilted heads and wide eyes, sensing a fracture in the woman who'd climbed the GOP ranks with steel resolve, a crack that widened with every heartbeat she didn't feel. She took a deep breath, her chest rising under her blazer, and met Lucy's unflinching gaze with eyes that shimmered, just for a moment, with something unguarded doubt, perhaps, or a grief she'd buried deep. "I grew up not far from here," she began, her voice softening into something raw, almost confessional, in the North Country, running through the woods, helping my dad at his plywood shop. "We didn't have much, but I saw my mom work hard teaching, raising yous, and I thought, that's enough. That's the way up." Her words trailed off, and for a heartbeat, she wasn't the congresswoman who'd faced down hearings, just a woman peering into a past that didn't match the present she'd fought for. The crowd held its breath, the logger in the back pausing mid-sip, the retiree's thermos stilled in her hand. Every eye locked on Stefanik as she stood suspended in her own story. Lucy tilted her head, her braids swaying gently, her silence a quiet demand that pressed Stefanik deeper into the moment. "I've got a little girl, me daughter. She's younger than you," Stefanik continued, her voice steadying but laced with a tremor she couldn't hide. "She's my heart playing in the yard, asking about the world. But years ago," she faltered, her throat bobbing as she swallowed hard, her hands tightening on the podium until the wood creaked. "My sister, Emily, she was 25, smart as a whip, went for a big job in Albany. She prepped for weeks, nailed the inner VYEW, but they gave it to some guileless qualified, louder voice. She came home crushed, said, 'I don't get it.' I told her to keep pushing, fought for policies to level the field, thought I'd fixed it. But hearing you, Lucy," her voice broke, a sharp, brittle crack that echoed through the hall, and she looked down, blinking hard against the tears welling in her eyes, her polished mask dis-soul VYing as she fought to steady herself. The crowd gasped, a jagged wave of shock and empathy that rolled through the benches like a gust over the peaks. A nurse in the front row pressed a hand to her mouth, her sob muffled but piercing. A logger muttered, "Damn," under his breath, his stubble shadowing a clenched jaw. A young mom in the back clutched her scarf, her eyes glistening as she nodded slowly. Lucy's aunt looked up from her fallen flyer, her knit cap slipping, a tear streaking down her cheek to drip onto the hardwood, Leah VYing a dark spot that spread like ink. Stefanik's words weren't just an answer, they were a confession, a crack in the armor of a woman who'd built her name on fairness, and they landed with a weight that shook the room to its core. Stefanik pressed on, her voice firming but hollowed out, as if the confession had drained something vital from her. "We're working tax breaks, job programs, pushing for equal shot. I've stood up in Congress, made the case. I'm not stopping." The words rang thin, a politician's echo drowned by the vulnerability she'd let bleed through. Lucy's brow furrowed, her hands tightening on her notebook until the pages crinkled, her lips pressing into a line that said she wasn't here for promises, she wanted truth, something to hold when Sarah's dreams stayed boxed up. The crowd sensed it too, their murmurs shifting from awe to unease, a restless energy bubbling beneath the surface as they waited for more. The moderator edged closer, his clipboard clutched like a shield, his nervous smile twitching as he prepared to move on. But Stefanik raised a hand, a quick, sharp gesture that stopped him cold, her heels scuffing the floor as she stepped from the podium, abandoning its safety entirely. She crouched before Lucy, her blazer brushing the hardwood, her sharp edges blurring into something tender, almost broken. "What's your name, honey?" she asked, her voice a whisper now, barely audible over the wind but heavy with intent. "Lucy," she said, steady, fierce, a quiet strength blooming beneath her breath. Stefanik nodded, a faint smile breaking through the cracks, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You're strong, Lucy, stronger than me, stronger than most." Soft claps rippled through the crowd, fading as the air thickened, heavy with expectation. Lucy shifted her weight, her boots scuffing the floor, and looked up at Stefanik with a clarity that cut through the haze. Auntie says fairness means girls get a real chance, she said, her voice a clear chime that sliced through the quiet like a bell over the valley. So why Sarah out if you're fighting for us? Stefanik rocked back, her face crumpling a flash of a woman undone. Not a leader, her poise dissol vying into something raw and human. The crowd caught its breath, a nurse's sob breaking free, a logger's fist clenching as he nodded, the weight of Lucy's words pressing down on every soul in the hall. Stefanik stood slowly, her movements deliberate, her hands flexing as she turned to the crowd, her gaze sweeping over them with a heave-ness that hadn't been there before, a shadow of guilt and resolve mingling in her eyes. She's right, she said, her voice louder now, cracked but rising, cutting through the murmurs like a wave against the shore. I've been fighting bills, speeches, fairness for all, but if girls like Lucy and Sarah are losing out, if the field's still tilted, then I haven't done enough. I haven't done Emily proud. The room erupted, gasps sharp as ice, sobs spilling from throats too tight to hold them, a swell of disbelief that crashed over the benches like a flood over the flats. A welder leapt to his feet, his hands clasped as sawdust fell from his sleeves. A retiree pounded her thermos, her damn right a growl that rumbled through the chaos. A young mom clutched her kid, her whispered truth, lost in the din but etched in her glistening eyes. Lucy's question had become a mirror, reflecting a gap too real to dismiss, a wound too deep to plaster over, and Stefanik's admission had lit a fire that blazed through the hall. The Glens Falls hall trembled now, a wildfire roaring from Lucy's spark, fanned by Stefanik's unraveling into a blaze that consumed every corner of the space. She stood exposed, her blazer wrinkled, her hands flexing as if grasping for a stance she'd lost. Lucy held her ground, her striped sweater a flare of quiet courage against the dimness, her notebook a banner of a dream that had flipped the night into chaos and reshaped it into something urgent and real. The crowd was alive, tears-streaked, wind-worn faces, tracing paths through the grime of long shifts, hands clasped in tight, desperate grips, knuckles whitening. Eyes blazed with shock, frustration, and a dawning resolve that flickered like embers catching wind. Her question, "Why's Sarah out?" had torn the room apart, peeling back layers of rhetoric to reveal a bleeding heart beneath, and Stefanik's "I haven't done enough" had struck the match, igniting a fire that refused to fade. Stefanik wiped her brow, her fingers brushing her hair as she stepped back to the podium. But its shield was ash now, a relic of a control she couldn't reclaim. "We're building fairness," she preached in chambers and on the trail, her voice ringing across packed rooms and airwaves, a line that once drew nods and raised hands. Now it haunted her, etched into the lines of her face-tight lips pressed into a thin slash, shadowed eyes glistening with a guilt she couldn't bury, a doubt that clung like the chill outside. The crowd felt it too, their murmurs swelling into a tempest soft at first, a ripple of "she's right" and "what about us?" Then louder, a chorus of voices clashing in a symphony of frustration and awakening. A logger stood, his flannel taut across his shoulders, his gravelly "my daughter too" cutting through the noise. A nurse beside him rose, her sob breaking as she nodded, her "I've seen it" a whisper that carried. A young dad in the back slammed his mug down, his muttered "this ain't fair," a plea that hung heavy. Lucy's aunt leapt up, pulling her close, her knit cap tumbling as she pressed her lips to Lucy's braids, her wiry frame trembling with pride and heartbreak. "You're my fighter, Luce," she choked out, her voice breaking as tears fell, dripping onto Lucy's sweater to leave dark spots on the stripes. Lucy nodded, patting her aunt's arm with a tenderness beyond her years, her brown eyes locked on Stefanik, glistening with a quiet steel that refused to bend. Stefanik crouched again, her heels brushing the floor, and reached out with a shaking hand. Lucy took idony fingers curling into her trembling palm, a bond forged in the wreckage of a night neither had foreseen. "You're incredible, Lucy," Stefanik said, her voice thick with awe, cracking under the weight. "Don't ever stop asking, okay?" Lucy smiled, soft but real, a curve of her lips that lit her face like dawn over the mountains. Sarah wouldn't, she whispered, her words a dagger and a lifeline, and Stefanik froze, Emily's ghost echoing in her resolve. She stood slowly, her heels scuffing as she rose, and turned to the crowd, her voice rising, raw and unshackled, cutting through the chaos like a beacon through the dark. "This isn't just my wake up," she said, fierce and trembling, her hands slashing the air as if to carve the words into the walls. "It's ours, all of ours. Kids like Lucy see the gaps while we talk fairness and build walls, while we let girls like Sarah slip through. She's confronted Meso. Why aren't we confronting this together? Why are we letting chances die when we can fight for them?" The room exploded. Applause thundered like a squall. Shouts tore from throats raw with emotion. Benches creaked as people leapt up in a swell that shook the floor. A nurse stood, sobbing, clapping until her hands bruised. A logger pounded his fist, his dam straight, a growl that rumbled through. A young mom lifted her kid, her yes, a chant that wove into the roar. Strangers embraced loggers with retirees, moms with welders' voices clashing in a cacophony of "we gotta fix it, this is on us, no more excuses," and Lucy stood with her aunt, a fragile spark, now a blazing torch lighting the night. Stefanik raised both hands, stilling the tempest with a gesture that trembled but held, her face a battlefield of ruin and fire, cheeks streaked with sweat, eyes alight with a purpose that burned through the haze. "Tomorrow, I'm back in D.C., she said, steady but shaking with resolve. "Not just for votes. I'm sitting with kids like Lucy, families like yours, workers, parents, all of you, and we're making this right together. Fairness isn't a speech, it's a chance we give, and I'll be damned if I don't start now." The crowd roared, a tidal wave lifting the roof, claps sharp as thunder, cheers ragged with hope, tears streaming down, faces lifted in defiance and unity, and Lucy's aunt hoisted her on her shoulders, her striped sweater soaring as she waved her notebook like a flare against the dusk. People stood linked by a shared wound, a fragile hope blazing into something fierce, their applause a vow to rise, to fight, to build. As Stefanik stepped back, her shoulders slumped but her eyes burning, the room pulsed with a truth that wouldn't fade. A 9-year-old had confronted a powerhouse, not with scorn, but with a question too true to sidestep. "Thank you, Lucy," she said, lost in the din, "for showing us up." Lucy nodded, braids bouncing, and whispered to her aunt, "Sarah, be proud, right?" Her aunt hugged her tight, tears soaking her sweater, her voice a broken sob of love. "So proud, Lucy, so proud," she'd cheer. The lights dimmed, but the fire didn't. People lingered, plotting, changed, a community forged in a little girl's courage, her voice echoing beyond the walls to a nation watching. If a 9-year-old could demand more, so could we.